Bestest Friend. This was the next episode, and this brought Ian Graham and Chris Graham onto the crew as board artists. Was from an idea, I think, by Roman Dirge, and it was part of this first six-pack. They hired us on to do 6 episodes at the beginning, and they always called them six-packs at Nickelodeon. And there wasn't enough money and enough time, basically, to do a six-pack. The budget was a little bit shorter than what we needed. So we ended up just packing everything in, and I think the artwork doesn't look as nice because of that. And we also had to rush. The board artists did their work in about 2/3 the time of what they did later on. And they and I, for these first 6 episodes, I think it was through the summer of 2000, we spent all of our time in Nickelodeon working on this stuff. 12, 14-hour days, and we were always... By the end, the whole place stank. You know, people weren't taking showers. People were sleeping on the couches. It was horrible. The whole place was starting to stink. I remember smelling of food. You know, people would be eating their food there. They weren't seeing their families or, you know, going out on dates with their girlfriends or anything. This is all that they did. And it was actually rather rude that Jonan then would be very negative to people about their contributions to the show. We were looking back at our storyboards today, actually, some of the board artists and myself, what we did on the show, and it's funny how far off we were on the characters, although the characters weren't as well defined at this point. We were laughing about the awkwardness of the drawings. This character's name was Dirge. I think it was named after Roman Dirge. It doesn't look anything like Roman Dirge. The idea for the show, the whole Keith thing, I believe, I was always told came from a person that used to work at Nickelodeon that was always leeching onto Jonan when he worked here on the pilot. The guy's name was Heath, and I don't know what his last name was, but supposedly this is the story of basically Jonan and this guy Heath, so he changed the name Heath into Keith. And Jonan was pretty much a shut-in, I think, before he worked on the show. He really didn't get out much or do anything. He didn't socialize, as far as I can tell, with many people. So I'm sure, you know, somebody who just wanted to be his best friend was probably the most frightening thing in the world back then. When we started this series, a lot of people thought that it was the next big thing to move on to. And we had a lot of ass-kissers basically coming into offices looking for jobs. You know, there were girls that were subtly trying to proposition me to get onto the show. People would drop names to try and get on the show, would try to bully me, and I was usually the first line to go through. Mary Harrington would always say, "Don't talk to me, talk to Steve. He's the one that's hiring on the show." So they couldn't go in through her. Nobody knew Jonan. He was a little bit, he seemed, a little bit defensive or a little bit odd to talk to at first. So a lot of people would come to me, and they thought that they could just get in by, being nice to me or chatting me up about any number of dumb things. And the whole emphasis was on people that could do the artwork and people I knew I could work with, and people that were geared towards this sort of animation, this sort of storyboarding, this sort of drawing. It was very hard to find artists for this series. It took us a long time to get everybody in place, almost disastrously long. We had to settle, I think, for some second choices on design, but not bad choices. I think, all in all, good people. And great artists. This is Chris Graham's little bit. He was so happy. You never get to do this sort of creativity on other animated programs. People look at you like you're odd, but coming up with a dumb little dance like that, or something like this with Michelangelo or whatever, his paintings. Shoving people out of the way. The sort of violence that went on really brightened up the crew's day that they were able to do this stuff. And they loved what they were doing. They loved their work. This episode in particular is very endearing, I think, and I still like it a lot, even though it isn't one of the better art episodes anymore of the series. It's one of the best stories of the series. It's just a great, simple story, and it really defines who Zim is and what he's doing on Earth. And it defines the Earth that he's in. So it's a great second episode for the series. This is Ian's stuff. Ian and Sean Murray were really good deadpan artists. They'd come up with great deadpan reactions. Very funny. The Scary Monkey Show, which you saw there for the first time, nothing much ever came of it. You always just saw Gurr watching it. I remember somebody, I think Rob Hummel or somebody, was trying to write a script about the Scary Monkey Show. and never came to fruition. I might be wrong. I can't remember. I thought I remember it almost becoming its own show, its own episode. This should have played a lot longer. They should have been going a lot slower in front of this house. We were always so pressed for time on this show. We took these shots here. These came directly from the pilot, I believe. This whole Sailor Moon. Jonan wanted a whole Sailor Moon transition, and I think I thumbnailed this out for Ian to clean up. Ridiculous. It was also nice in a lot of these early shows. They really introduced the Zim, his entire area, and the world that he lived in to the viewer. If you went into that house, you would see the lab quite a bit in his earlier episodes. You'd see how it sort of fits together. He goes down into the ground, and he ends up in his lab. It was a sort of establishing that you really need early in a series so that people understand. If somebody comes in the second episode, they don't suddenly get lost or not understand what's happening. Those were our early attempt at speed lines. We were trying to mimic the Japanese with those speed lines, and in the beginning it was very hard to get the designers to understand what we were trying to do. And there were bigger fish to fry, so we never got those speed lines dead on until later on, somewhere around episode 10 or so. We were lucky enough when we did these first 6 that we really impressed through the stories and the artwork and the storyboards and the animatics. We impressed New York, and they picked us up for a further 14 episodes and made it a full 20-episode season. So the crew basically went on hiatus, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks after these first 6 episodes, just enough to rest up and get back into the series. And that was great. That gave us the extra money we needed to do better shows and take the whole series beyond what it was. That was possibly one of the best scenes ever written for Gurr. It just shows his absolute psychotic personality, He's almost schizo. He can just turn from one personality to another instantly. And Ricky was always very cute. He always did a great voice. You can see by Zim's eyes. We're still trying to figure out how the eyes work in this show. I don't think those triangle eyes, those equilateral triangle eyes, just never figured it in later on. We sort of gave up on those. Again, a lot of the art in this, a lot of the stuff that I was trying to do, compositions and such, and impose on board artists, was generally a little bit mangled. I wanted them to show perspectives, and a lot of people weren't doing it. They were showing up shots or down shots so distant that you couldn't tell any real perspective. It looked like faux perspective, which you see mimicked a lot in other shows, or a lot of other shows do that, and they think that that's great perspective, and it really isn't. It's a cheat. It's a half decent cheat. This sequence, Chris Graham always hates this. This was his worst boarded sequence ever. And it really is a mess. But it gets the point across. And storytelling, I think, is always the key. Now, the whole idea here, this whole thing sort of meshed out. It was Joan and Chris Graham and myself coming together. I turned it into this slowdown thing. That was my contribution. It really made the characters sound like cows, and it was just the funniest thing, I thought, when we did an animatic, and I was slowing down the voices in the animatic. So you're doing each scene, each character is slowing down more and more, but their scenes are getting faster, as in they're, taking up less time. It should have even gone worse. I still wish I would have put in another 3 or 4 consecutive sessions of those scenes, so they were just quick little one-frame things, so it just becomes a whole flickering of frames. What could have been.